All right, so get this. You guys sent in this excerpt, and it uses the sphere metaphor to represent, like, literally everything.
Whoa.
And I gotta say, it's really messing with my mind, kind of like existential whiplash. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a heady concept. One that
Yeah.
can send you down a rabbit hole, but I think that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It forces us to re-examine everything we thought we knew.
Okay,
Ah,
so before we get too lost down that rabbit hole, let's start with the basics. What exactly is this sphere? We're not talking about just like a ball, right?
right, it's a metaphor
A metaphor.
for the entire universe, literally everything you can think of.
So thoughts, emotions,
Not
experiences,
all of it, every single thing.
atoms, galaxies, my cat.
Even your cat.
Yeah.
All inside this sphere. And the idea is that everything within the sphere is interconnected.
So it's not just like a random jumble of stuff,
No,
but like a unified whole
exactly.
where each part is somehow related to every other part.
Whoa,
Okay.
it's a pretty big idea.
It is pretty wild.
And it challenges the way we normally see the world, right? We tend to see things as separate,
That
fragmented ourselves as individuals, distinct from everything else.
Yeah, definitely.
But this metaphor suggests that's an illusion. We're actually all part of this interconnected web, like
Mhm.
threads in a tapestry, each one contributing to the overall pattern.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could shift our perspective. But the excerpt also mentions this veil that kind of obscures our vision of the sphere, like we're looking at reality through like a foggy window or something.
Right, the veil represents our limitations,
Limitation.
all the stuff that prevents us from seeing the sphere clearly.
Hmm.
Our biases, assumptions, cultural conditioning.
Hmm. You know what it's like? Sometimes I get these glimpses of that interconnectedness. Like a random encounter with someone will lead to this chain of events and it feels almost orchestrated.
Right.
But then just as quickly, I'm back to seeing the world as like a series of random disconnected things.
I think those moments when you sense that interconnectedness, those are like little tears in the veil.
Hmm.
You're getting a glimpse of the sphere's true nature.
Ah.
But for the most part, we're operating with a limited perspective, mistaking those glimpses for the whole truth.
And that's where this whole farce of separation idea comes in, right? This
Yeah.
feeling of being separate from each other, separate from the world around us. The text makes it sound like it's some kind of trick we're playing on ourselves.
It is a very powerful illusion created by our minds, by our limited perception.
Hmm.
And it has real-world consequences because when we believe we're separate, we act accordingly. We compete, hoard resources, build walls.
Hmm. Both literally and figuratively.
Right.
But what if we could lift that veil even just a little bit? How would that change things?
Well, imagine a world where people truly understood their interconnectedness with all things.
Okay.
Compassion and empathy would become the norm, not the exception.
Wow.
We'd be more likely to collaborate, share resources, approach conflict resolution as a shared endeavor. It'd be a fundamentally different way of being.
But is it even possible to fully lift the veil? I mean, it seems like it's so deeply ingrained in how we perceive the world.
That's the big question. And the text doesn't offer a simple answer,
Of course not.
but it does hint that we can work to thin the veil, make those glimpses of the sphere more frequent, more enduring.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well,
We have to go meditate on a mountaintop or something?
that might help, but it's not the only way. The text suggests that self-awareness is key.
Self-awareness.
The more we understand our own biases, our own conditioning, the more we can start to see through the veil.
So it's like realizing you're wearing rose-colored glasses and then taking them off to see the world as it truly is.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And it's also about cultivating a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness.
Okay.
Being willing to question our assumptions, consider different perspectives, challenge our own ingrained ways of thinking.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It's the kind of work that can lead to profound personal transformation and a deeper understanding of our place in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, so we've got this sphere, this all-encompassing container for reality, and we've got this veil obscuring our vision. Now, the text goes on to say that even the way we perceive time is affected by this sphere metaphor. And I have to admit, this is where I really started to get lost.
Yeah, time is a tricky concept,
Yeah.
even without the sphere metaphor.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is the idea that within the sphere, time isn't linear. It exists all at once.
Hold on. Are you saying that the past, present, and future are all happening simultaneously, like some kind of cosmic time warp?
It's not quite a time warp in the sci-fi sense. Think of it more like a carousel. Every moment, every event is a point on this carousel. And because the carousel is a whole complete structure, every point is accessible from any other point. It's not about moving along a straight line from past to future, but rather existing within a timeless whole.
Okay. I think I'm following so far. But if time isn't linear, what does that mean for our everyday experience of it?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore in more detail later on. But for now, I'll leave you with this thought. If all moments coexist, if the past, present, and future are all happening simultaneously within this sphere, then perhaps our experience of time is more fluid, more malleable than we realize.
This is definitely blowing my mind wide open. I have so many more questions, but I think we're going to need a break to process all of this.
Sounds good. Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about how time exists all at once within this sphere.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there.
It really is. It challenges our usual understanding of time.
Big time. So how do we actually live as the sphere? How does this new understanding of time affect how we live our lives?
That's where things get really interesting. Because if all moments coexist, then it means our actions in the present can ripple outward, affecting not just our future, but our past as well.
Wait, are you saying we can change the past? That sounds like some Back to the Future stuff.
Not in the literal sense of like going back and altering events, but think about it. Our understanding of the past is constantly changing based on our present experiences and insights.
Yeah, that's true.
As we grow and change, so does our interpretation of past events.
Okay, so it's not about changing what happened, but changing how we relate to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly powerful.
But how does this nonlinear view of time change how we think about the future?
Well, if we're not bound by this rigid, linear progression of time, then the future becomes less about predicting outcomes and more about creating possibilities.
So every moment is like a chance to shift our trajectory.
Precisely.
Okay, I like the sound of that. So instead of feeling trapped by a predetermined path, we have the power to shape our own future, even if we can't see exactly how it's going to unfold.
Exactly. And that brings us back to those key takeaways from the sphere metaphor, interconnectedness in the veil.
Right, I remember those. But remind me how they tie into this new understanding of time.
Well, if everything is interconnected, then our actions have much wider consequences than we might realize. Every choice, every thought sends ripples through this web influencing events in ways we may not even be aware of.
Like the butterfly effect.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
like that. So something you do today might have repercussions days, weeks, even years down the line.
That makes me feel a greater sense of responsibility for my actions.
It should. When we understand that we're not just isolated individuals moving along a timeline, we start to see the impact of our choices. We become more mindful of how we interact with the world.
But what about the veil? How does that fit into all of this? If we're only seeing glimpses of this interconnectedness, how can we possibly make choices that align with the greater good?
That's the challenge, right? We're operating with limited information. But remember, the text suggests we can work to thin the veil, to see more clearly.
Right, by increasing our self-awareness and questioning our assumptions. But how does that actually translate into making better choices?
It starts with recognizing that we're not always seeing the full picture. Our judgments, biases, fears are all coloring our perceptions.
Okay.
When we become aware of these filters, we can start to question them. We can ask ourselves, is this really true? Or am I just seeing what I want to see?
It's like we need to constantly check ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
Making sure we're not letting our own limitations dictate our actions.
And that's where self-reflection comes in. The more we understand ourselves, the more we can start to loosen the grip of the veil.
Okay, so we're being mindful of our interconnectedness. We're working to thin the veil, and we're embracing the idea that time isn't linear. Anything else we need to know about living as the sphere?
The text also emphasizes the importance of embracing duality.
Duality.
The idea that the sphere contains both light and darkness, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction. It's the interplay of these opposing forces that creates the richness and complexity of existence.
But doesn't that contradict the idea of everything being interconnected? If we're all part of this unified whole, shouldn't there be more harmony and less conflict?
But that's where it gets interesting. Harmony doesn't necessarily mean the absence of conflict. Think of a symphony. You have all these different instruments playing different notes, sometimes clashing, sometimes blending. But it's the combination of those diverse sounds, those opposing forces, that creates the beauty and power of the music.
That's a great analogy. So how do we embrace duality in a practical sense? Does it mean just accepting all the bad stuff that happens in the world?
It's not about passive acceptance. It's about recognizing that those bad things, as you call them, are just as much a part of the sphere as the good things. It's about understanding that light can't exist without darkness. Joy wouldn't be as sweet without sorrow to contrast it.
So it's about seeing the whole picture with all its complexities and contradictions and finding a way to make space for all of it.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And that can be challenging, especially when we're faced with suffering and injustice. But remember, the sphere metaphor reminds us that we're not separate from those experiences. We're part of them. And perhaps by embracing duality, by holding space for both the light and the darkness, we can contribute to a greater sense of balance and wholeness in the world.
Wow, this conversation is giving me so much to think about. I'm starting to see how this sphere metaphor can really change how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe.
It's a powerful tool, for sure,
Yeah.
and that understanding can be truly transformative.
Definitely transformative. It can shift our perspective, expand our awareness, and ultimately lead to a more fulfilling and purposeful life.
I agree. This has been a really great discussion.
It really has. But before we wrap things up, I have one more question that's been bugging me.
Okay, shoot.
The text keeps saying that everything is a reflection of ourselves.
Right.
What does that actually mean? Does it mean we're somehow responsible for everything we see and experience in the world?
That's a very profound question and one that deserves careful consideration. So why don't we take a moment to gather our thoughts and then dive into that concept in more detail?
Okay, so we're back. And that last question is still kind of swirling around in my head about how everything is a reflection of ourselves.
Right. It's a really deep idea.
It is. So what does it actually mean? Does it mean like I'm responsible for everything that happens in the world, even like bad stuff?
That's where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
It's important not to oversimplify this concept.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we're literally creating every single event or person we encounter. It's not about blame or guilt.
Okay, good, because that would be a lot of pressure.
Right, it would be. But think of it more as a principle of resonance. We tend to attract and experience situations that reflect our inner state, our beliefs, our patterns of thought and behavior.
So like if I'm constantly thinking negative thoughts,
Yeah,
I'm more likely to have negative experiences.
exactly. Our inner world shapes our outer world.
Yeah.
But it's not a simple cause and effect relationship. It's more like a feedback loop.
A feedback loop.
Yeah, a continuous interplay between what's going on inside us and what's happening around us.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those situations that seem completely out of our control, like natural disasters? Are you saying that people who experience those things are somehow attracting that into their lives because of their inner state?
No, not at all. It's important to remember that this is just a metaphor. It's a framework for understanding reality, not a rigid set of rules. So in situations like natural disasters, it's not about blame. It's about recognizing that even in the face of events we can't control, our inner state can have a huge impact on how we respond and how we move forward.
So it's about our inner resilience, our ability to find meaning even in the midst of suffering.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the idea of the veil. If we're only seeing things through our limited perspective, we might see those external events as proof that the universe is against us,
Right.
reinforcing a sense of victimhood.
Yeah, I can see that.
But if we can start to thin the veil, we can perhaps see those same events as opportunities for growth, for transformation, for connecting with a deeper sense of purpose.
So this sphere metaphor, it's not about blaming ourselves for everything that happens, but more about empowering ourselves to respond to life's challenges in a more conscious and intentional way.
That's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that we have a role to play in co-creating our reality, even if we don't always see the full picture.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. It feels like we've gone through so many layers of reality,
We have.
and I feel like I'm walking away with a whole new perspective.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and see where this new understanding takes you.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, if this deep dive has left you with questions, or maybe there's another topic you'd like us to explore, send them our way. Until next time, keep expanding your awareness, and as always, thanks for listening.